Well, on that note, we'll have some folks that might wander in early, and if they are wandering a bit late, and if they need to catch up, this will be available on demand shortly, as soon as I can rip it down and put it back up to the website. So, uh, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for the first official GCMA Focal Point webinar of 2026. We had the virtual congress a few months back, and we were kind of itching to meet up with you all again. So looking forward to being here. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what the Focal Point happens to be, this is our typically member exclusive webinar series where we get together on a quarterly basis, talk about all manner of issues affecting crowd management and event safety overall. And we were having a bit of a conversation about, wow, we're nearing the summer outdoor event season, so we should probably talk about the weather and what we're going to expect and how to prepare for it. And we wanted to open this up to everyone, regardless of whether or not you happen to be a GCMA member or not. So if you are not a GCMA member currently, I hope you find value in what we're doing and do consider to become a member in the future. So as I said a lot, my guess is many of us are really neck deep in preparations for the summer season. So we wanted to bring some of our friends from DTN on to talk a bit about what we can expect. I think, I wrote a few notes on here, some operational planning aspects, some technology forecasting, what we can just kind of look forward to over the next few months. Before I turn the keys over to that, quick reminder, if you have any questions throughout the program, please do use the Q&A feature at the bottom. And at about the midway point, when Stephen is done with his section, we'll stop. We'll answer any questions that we have coming in from that. And then we'll move into the second portion with Brad, and then we'll do another sort of wrap-up Q&A section at that point. So, Annie, I don't know if you have any other comments before everyone tells me to shut up and we move on to the program.
No, just to remind you, it isn't always the summer. I mean, most of us are getting ready in the northern hemisphere, but as Kathy keeps telling us, it's not summer everywhere in the world. So, and I suppose it's just a big welcome to everybody, really, from us all at GCMA. Delighted to have Stephen and Brad on. I think I described this as a webinar for sensible heads in one of the last meetings. That may not have been the exact words I used, but yeah, this is a definite opportunity for those of us in the industry to get a good feel of this. And you may not be familiar with GCMA as a whole. You may have come to us through the many bits of press that we've had about this, which has been very exciting. So a very big welcome to those that we don't normally see, and a huge welcome to those that stay with us for regular webinars. I mean, I'm still getting over the last one on nightlife and drugs. So yeah, this is going to be slightly different, I think, in terms of webinars than the last one. So yeah. But on that note, I think probably best to pass over to Stephen and Brad to introduce themselves, and Jake and I'll disappear and come back for questions at the end.
We will, and I will say the last thing, because I promised I would do this last time. Kathy, I am sorry about mentioning summer. I realize you are totally opposite end, but I guess that's what you get for being in the most beautiful part of the world. So, on that note, Stephen, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself, and we'll be off to the races.
Thank you very much, Jacob and Annie, and good day, everyone. It's a huge pleasure to be here. I'm Stephen Davenport, a long-range weather risk communicator and meteorologist at DTN. And if you're looking forward to the Northern Hemisphere's summer half as much as I am, then I'm looking forward to it twice as much as you. So here's what we'll be looking at today. A glimpse of what we've seen so far this spring, a glance at how we put the forecast together, then a medium-range outlook for the next few weeks into May. Then the seasonal influences on the upcoming summer's conditions, plus the global seasonal model output. And then we'll tie those together for the official DTN forecast. Then it's worthwhile having a look at the tropical outlook, and then I'll hand over to Brad at the end for a look at the industry impacts. So let's start with a reminder of what March delivered across Europe. We had a rather blocked pattern, that's to say expansive and slow-moving high pressure across the continent. And that pushed the main frontal zone further north than usual. And you can see that by the elevated precipitation amounts on the right there from Scotland to Scandinavia. But it meant a lot of dry and warm weather across much of Europe. Although you should note some wetter areas around parts of the Mediterranean. That's another result of patterns shifted further north and being rather blocked. And that might be a little bit of a forerunner of what we might see this summer. The shortage of spring precipitation has led to dry soils and drought across parts of Eastern and Central Europe, which, if they're persistent, could lead to feedback loops that'll end up being significant to the summer forecast. So if soil stays dry, then air more readily heats up, feeding back into expected high pressure presence and blocking patterns, which would then further exacerbate the dryness and elevate heat wave risks again and increase chances of further drought and wildfires. Now onto our forecasts, and first look at what we call the subseasonal range, which takes us through the next 2 to 4 weeks. First thing to consider is the climate factors having an influence at this range. First, both the subseasonal and the seasonal driver is the El Nino Southern Oscillation, or ENSO. And that's a pattern that varies between El Nino and La Nina, passing through a neutral phase in between. We're currently in a neutral phase, but hold your horses. We've got an El Nino on the way. We've also got warmer than average waters in the North Atlantic, not quite as warm as last year at this time. And in addition, you might recall a sudden stratospheric warming event which disturbed the stratospheric polar vortex, which still has some lingering influence on the blocked position and the cooler or colder outbreaks in the short term. I should explain what the MJO is. This is the Madden-Julian oscillation. That's one of the main influences on the global weather patterns in the medium range. That's to say, in this 2 to 4 week range we're looking at. It's a regular pulse of tropical convection and thunderstorms that circumnavigates the globe eastwards, typically through 30 to 60 days, sometimes 90 days. And if it's strong enough, this convection can alter tropical circulations, as shown in the diagram here, with knock-on effects even in distant parts of the world, altering the shape of long waves into the mid-latitude. So this is the kind of thing that can have an impact on the seasonal forecast at shorter timeframes and then add a little bit of variability. This graph is one way of tracking the MJO and its forecast path and strength. It may look a little complicated, but it does show the MJO moves through a number of phases that are assigned the numbers 1 to 8 for different parts of the oceans. And notice how it's gained strength in phase 8. It's forecast to pass into phases 1 and 2 in late April. And one impact is for possible cooler or colder outbreaks in parts of Europe early spring, or sorry, rather mid-spring, late spring into May. And across the eastern US. Other climate drivers will be delved into a bit more when we get into the seasonal outlook. So onto the sub-seasonal forecast itself, and next week there's a warm look to it across much of Europe, showing here both the ECMWF on the left and CFS V2 on the right, global models. For comparison, the ECMWF is the European model, CFS, the USA model. And they're showing a similar pattern. Warm across much of Europe, but those cooler or colder risks across Scotland and parts of northern and northeast Europe and Scandinavia. The pressure pattern in the top left shows high pressure at high latitudes, and that's a negative North Atlantic oscillation pattern, or negative NAO pattern, which has high pressure near Greenland and Iceland, and lower pressure in the East Atlantic and near Spain. And Spain and Portugal are going to be rather wet at times in this time period. Following weeks got a similar broad pattern in both models, but Eastern Atlantic low pressure could shift a bit further north and bring more rain to Western Europe, possibly including the UK. Where the models differ is for higher pressure over Scandinavia in the CFS, with colder air into Russia on its eastern flank. But much of Western and Southern Europe should stay warmer than normal. And then through the middle of May, high pressure positioned over the East Atlantic or near the UK, showing up more strongly in the CFS, which has more cooling across Central and Western Europe. But I think that's going to be the trend. It shows up to some degree in the ECMWF as well, and some wetter weather for Northwest Europe along with that. Onwards now to the summer forecast itself for Europe, and this is for June, July, and August. Well, what goes into the forecast? It's compiled by taking the long-term climatology, narrowing that down to the trends over the past decades, and relating that to the statistical analogs from teleconnections, and mixing that with some of the seasonal computer models. So that blend creates our final forecast solution. Firstly, the teleconnections, what they are and what they do. Teleconnections in weather refer to significant relationships or links between large-scale weather patterns and circulation anomalies at places that can be pretty far apart around the globe and often across really big geographical areas. These patterns, like the El Nino Southern Oscillation, already mentioned, the ENSO, can influence temperatures, rainfall, storm tracks, and the jet stream location over large areas and far away. Climate events in one region can have a domino effect on weather patterns in distant areas. So some of the most significant teleconnections relate to sea surface temperature anomalies around the world. And because they evolve slowly, they can give us a clue to longer range patterns. That was the current situation, sea surface temperatures. And this is the ECMWF forecast of the same for the Northern Hemisphere summer. North Atlantic's been very warm for a long time. That's a positive phase of the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, or AMO, and that'll continue this year. It won't be as warm as the last couple of years, but there have been some record-breaking sea temperatures up in the Arctic through the winter and early spring. Over in the North Pacific, we've got the equally long-lasting negative phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, or PDO, which is a pattern of warm waters across the North Pacific, but cooler towards the western coasts of North America. And one final feature worth mentioning is the Indian Ocean Dipole, or IOD, which swings between positive and negative in a similar fashion to ENSO. And this year we're likely to see a neutral to positive IOD. Now, these diagrams might give you some idea, similar to MJO, of how ENSO changes can influence circulation patterns. Top left is La Nina, which gives us rising air and strong convection in the Western Pacific and descending air in the Eastern Pacific, compared with the neutral conditions there on the bottom right. Now, if I fade into El Nino, you can see that during El Nino, the reverse is true, as these two diagrams depict the La Nina circulation top left still, and that's El Nino bottom right, which now shows the strongest convection in the central and eastern equatorial Pacific and descending air further west, which is why we can end up with drier conditions, for example, in Australia. A graphical look at the current global sea surface temperature anomalies. Global temperatures on the left are showing much warmer than average. Currently the second warmest ever, behind only 2024, and with El Nino developing, that's probably going to increase as the year goes on. The Atlantic's a little bit cooler overall than recent years, but still nicely above average, with a positive AMO regime expected to continue this year. May come closer to average before temperatures pick up again through May and June. So to summarize ENSO, we've emerged from a weak wintertime La Nina into ENSO neutral conditions in the Nino 3-4 region, which is the Central Eastern Pacific. But temperatures are rising pretty quickly, and there's a lot of subsurface warmth on tap. So El Nino is on the way this summer, and it could become a strong one by the autumn. The most recent ENSO forecasts show the average of many model outcomes having a warming trend from neutral ENSO currently to El Nino through the Northern Hemisphere summer. Probably it's going to end up being a strong event. This is the latest compiled forecast from the International Research Institute, and the thicker red line is the mean of the dynamical forecast, showing El Nino developing through summer and reaching a strong threshold by the end of summer, and then possibly towards very strong 2 degrees above normal by the time we reach the autumn. Another predictor is our own analogs that we at DTN come up with. We'll look more into the analogs in a bit, but these are the 10 closest years to 2026's oceanic and atmospheric patterns. The mean here is also solidly showing a steadily developing El Nino, the black line, becoming strong in the autumn. Another way of looking at the ENSO forecast, this time from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center, chances of return to La Nina virtually zero, and we can see decreasing probability of neutral ENSO while the odds of El Nino rise. Throwing in more ENSO outlooks from the global forecast centers, they all depict warming in the equatorial Pacific towards a probably strong El Nino, and at the very least trending moderate. If you look at the top center graph, that's the UK Met Office and CMCC models in red and purple, pretty much off the chart, colloquially known as a super El Nino, with the temperatures in the central Pacific at least 2 degrees above average, and they've got it going way higher than that, which is maybe a little concern for ocean temperatures. But it also makes life a little bit difficult for analogs because there are so few El Ninos that there have been that sort of strength. Other clues to the forecast can come from earlier signals. For example, the polar vortex, as mentioned, took a few blows in late winter and early spring, where it was weaker than normal, as these graphs, I hope, illustrate. That's going to have an effect on pressure patterns into May. We've already seen that in the subseasonal outlook in the shape of high latitude, high pressure, the negative NAO pattern, which can bring cooler outbreaks into parts of Europe and Eastern North America, but that shouldn't last into the summer. So 2 reasons why we could have some cooler outbreaks during the latter part of spring, the MJO and the knock-on effect of the disturbed polar vortex earlier on. So we should see a northward shifted jet stream through summer and northward shifted frontal zone, pushing low pressure tracks further north, allowing drier weather across much of Europe with widespread warmer than average conditions. But that can lead to more weakness in the pressure pattern further south, eventually leading to some wet and stormy conditions in around the Mediterranean at times this summer. Otherwise, increased risks of persistent extreme weather such as drought and heat waves, East Central Europe being an example, but flood risks in the peripheral areas, maybe including the Iberian and Balkan peninsulas. One way of looking at the impacts of these drivers is to look at the correlations for the summer season of temperatures with both a positive AMO and with El Nino. The AMO slightly favors above average temperatures across Europe, but particularly the southeast, while there's also a weak positive correlation across much of Europe with El Nino, although that's less certain for northwest and far southeast Europe. So let's take a look at the analogs that make up part of our final forecast. Our analogs, as we've seen, are based on a developing El Nino, positive AMO, negative PDO, and the IOD is slightly positive or near neutral. And we come up with a weighted composite of 10 analog years, our top 10 that you can see there. And the best analogs are the top 3, 97 and 28 were good analogs for El Nino. So there are various reasons to expect above average warmth for much of Europe this coming summer, or at least for warmth to be more probable than cooler than average conditions. Developing El Nino, the warm phase of the AMO for being first and foremost. So these point towards the probability of a widely warm or hot and rather dry summer in much of Europe, but with those provisos for Southern Europe at times, the risks of occasionally wetter and cooler weather in places. So here are the June analogs from now 10 years for temperatures and precipitation. And these aren't a bad match for the models, which we'll see in a minute. A lot of warmth with a dry signal for Central and Eastern Europe, but some cooler, wetter conditions in the southwest and southeast Europe, so Spain and Portugal, and the Balkans could be somewhat wetter. For July, the analog has a cooler risk for Far Eastern and Southeastern Europe and Russia, and a slightly cooler signal for the Iberian Peninsula again, but above to well above average temperatures elsewhere and below average precipitation. Hints of something wetter again in the southwest and the southeast. Now in August, some indications of high pressure shifting a bit further north, making North and Northeastern Europe warm or hot, but opening up more of Southern Europe to low pressure and cooler and wetter conditions, or at least less warm. So we could see more of Central Southern Europe turning wetter and perhaps stormier. The summer as a whole then, widespread warm anomalies, but cooler chances in the southwest and far southeast. And the analogs also show drier than normal conditions for Central and Northern Europe, and above average rain for the southwest, far south and southeastern parts of Europe. Of course, analogs are not the be all and end all. We need to look at the computer models as well. So we combine those with the analogs to get the full picture. We use predictions from several global models, but notably the ECMWF and the CFS v2. First up, the ECMWF, lots of orange and red showing up each month from June right through to August. Some seasonably cool and wet conditions for Spain in August. Also June. Scandinavia tending to become drier in August, and hints of potentially wetter conditions around the Med, particularly in August. But no, the dryness across much of Europe, especially East Central, and by the end of the summer, more northern parts. CFS V2 model doesn't look too different, but there are some variations. The Iberian Peninsula in particular looks cooler, which ties in the wetter outlook showing up. It also shows wet conditions around the Med, but pushing further north by August. Aside from that, much of Europe forecast to have well above average temperatures, as also seen in the ECMWF. And finally, the C3S multi-system seasonal forecast that derives its output from 8 major global seasonal models, that also shows us above average temperatures for the summer right across Europe, but maybe a little closer to seasonal for parts of the southwest, northwest, and southeast. And the precipitation forecast also has that drier than normal signal across central and eastern Europe, but enough of a low pressure track to give wetter conditions across to western and northern Scandinavia. Now let's put together the model guidance and the analogs to pull together the official DTN forecast. And here's the temperature outlook from June through to August, month by month. For July, it takes into account those cooler chances across the far eastern parts and subdued temperatures for parts of Iberia where it could be wetter. But otherwise, as the analogs and models indicated, we've got widespread above to well above normal temperatures widely across Europe. And for the summer period overall, no surprise to see warmer than normal. The strongest normal is across north central Europe. But the forecast as it stands is suggestive of strong heat wave risks, especially for parts of north central, eastern Europe, and particularly if it stays dry and the drought continues, with sluggish weather patterns, flooding and severe storm risks are possible around the Med in particular. Pressure patterns, again, not going to come as much of a surprise. High pressure dominating and tending to become focused across northeast Europe as the summer goes on. And you can see that potential for lower pressure around the Med and southeastern and southwestern parts of Europe. And in fact, you can see it better if we look at the sea level pressure outlook for the summer as a whole. So this is what it does for the rainfall. Potentially wetter than normal around southwest Europe, and a wet signal for southeast Europe in June, and then again in August, at which time much of the Med and southwestern Europe showing up as wetter than normal with storm risks. Just a reminder of how dry much of Europe was in March, with increasing drought risks, but wet from Ireland, Northern Ireland through Scotland to western North Scandinavia. Then overall for the summer, on top of that, it looks like drought will be exacerbated in many areas, leading to wildfire risks. But around southern Europe, especially the Med, flood and landslide risks in susceptible areas as storms develop. And some of those storms have a risk of becoming strong to severe. Of course, occasional summer storms are possible almost anywhere, but they just have a higher probability across southern Europe this summer. And even a couple of strong low pressure systems could develop somewhere in the Med. Finally, a quick summary to absorb the European forecast. Most significant message is the risk of unusually sustained periods of any type of weather, like drought, strong heat waves, and associated risks, with some strong heat spikes possible elsewhere as well. But with weather systems blocked up in around the edges, particularly across the Med, that risk of prolonged rainfall, storms and major floods, with Spain and Portugal, southern Italy and the Balkan Peninsula perhaps most targeted. Globally now, the forecast looks like this, with El Nino on the way, a lot of above average warmth across the northern hemisphere. A few exceptions, subdued temperatures where it looks abnormally wet. One thing worth noting is that dry signal across India. It's a tricky monsoon forecast with opposing signals from El Nino and the IOD, but it could be a slow start to the monsoon season across South Asia, with below average rainfall overall, except in the northwest and into Pakistan. Australia and New Zealand could have a warmer winter than usual and a drier one around the coasts. And Indonesia, although it's in its dry season, it's showing even drier than usual. So expect some elevated forest fire threats across there. Much of Southeast Asia, though, could be wet. The monsoon rains ought to be reduced, so that may be indicative of a rather busy cyclone season across the Western Pacific, Southeast Asia, and up into Japan. A quick focus on the US forecasts, which are also derived from a blend of analogs and models in the same way as Europe. The last 3 months have shown a warm up across the east after wintertime Arctic outbreaks, especially in January. Next 15 days have variable patterns. Initially, some abnormal heat, especially across central areas in the Midwest, but there'll be a sharp change as warmth gets squeezed eastward ahead of a trough, bringing a cold outbreak into the central US next week. Chances of some snow towards the US-Canada border. And also along the temperature boundaries, some because there's such a big contrast, some heavy rain and strong to severe storm risks. Western US, a little bit of drought relief, wetter at times, with some welcome rain and mountain snow to the southwest and the Rockies. In the following couple of weeks through mid-May, cooler or colder outbreaks in the Midwest and eastern US and the northern plains as well, partly due to that negative NAO pattern with the high pressure near Greenland, forcing troughing further south. But in the west, we'll see more high pressure region and above average temps for the south as well. And there's some extreme heat possible for the time of year in southern areas, notably around Texas. Also note a continuation of at least somewhat dry conditions in the Pacific Northwest and across the upper Midwest. Meanwhile, severe storms are going to be a threat, especially across the south central US and the Gulf Coast. The summer forecast, we have hot weather impact in Texas, especially later in summer, and also the Pacific Northwest, but more so earlier in the season. So the concern for the Pacific Northwest is therefore for elevated wildfire threats. And that could become more of a threat in the southern plains and Texas as well later in summer as the heat and dryness build. Severe weather outbreaks look like having more of an impact than usual from the central plains through to the Midwest and across to the Northeast. One last thing to mention, the probability of an active monsoon season in the Southwest, especially Arizona, with flash flood risks. Something else to consider, though, before the rains arrive, there'll be risks of dry storms, so electrical storms with little or no precipitation. So lightning strikes could bring threats of sparking off wildfires. Quick look at the early summer drought situation. This is NOAA's drought outlook that has drought either persisting or developing across much of the western and southern US, but from central eastern Texas across the Midwest, Ohio Valley, and the Mid-Atlantic, there should be some drought removal with that area of increased wetness. Finally, the 2026 tropical outlook. A reminder of last season first. It was a bit less busy than expected considering the oceanic conditions, and rather unusually, there were no hurricane strength storms that made landfall, thank goodness, in the US, just tropical storm Chantal, which hit the Midwest and Carolinas. But what does it take ideally for tropical storms? Well, tropical activity is more likely when all three of these conditions are in place, but we really only have one out of the three this year, the warm Atlantic Ocean surface temperatures. So although the ocean should be warm enough, because of El Nino, there should be increased wind shear across the Atlantic, and that tends to suppress large-scale convection, and particularly at times of increased Sahara dust when we get strong easterly winds blowing out of West Africa. There's an idealized look at hurricane frequency in El Nino years, fewer than average usually, although it does mean increased chances in the Eastern Pacific. El Nino seasons, as the climate shows, average fewer named storms, hurricanes in the Atlantic than ENSO neutral years, and weak La Nina seasons are notably more active than ENSO neutral years. So from left to right here, The bars show storm numbers in strong El Nino years are rather low, through neutral ENSO in the middle to strong La Nina conditions in the right, favoring development. So the correlation is pretty clear. And the ECMWF global outlook certainly ties in with that, with fewer Atlantic main development region tropical storms, that area in blue through the mid-Atlantic, but elevated numbers in the Pacific, which jives pretty well with the precipitation outlook that we saw earlier in the global graphic. And this is DTN's initial hurricane season outlook, similar to last year, featuring near to below average storm activity, largely due to the development of strong El Nino. Enhanced shear and cooler water temperatures, slightly cooler water temperatures in the main development region could inhibit development, but close-in storms need to be watched throughout the season. That's to say, areas around the Gulf and the near Atlantic down in the southeast there. Most storms, though, we're expecting to develop mid-Atlantic should recurve away to the northeast. That's maybe something to look out for towards the autumn in Western and Northern Europe, the possibility of ex-hurricanes approaching. And with that, and before Brad takes a look at industry impacts, are there any questions arising from the summer weather outlook?
Stephen, hey, sorry, I'm trying to get myself back on screen, so forgive me for a quick moment. Well, my head is racing. I have about 3 pages of notes here. I do have a couple of quick questions. So you dropped a number of so let's see, EC, MWF, AMO, BDO, IOD. Can you give me just sort of a quick layman's snapshot of what those happen to be?
Yeah, sure. The ECMWF just stands for the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasting. It's one of the major global centres for numerical models. We rely on quite heavily. It's proven to be the most reliable for most of the time. The CFS V2, that's the American model, which we use alongside it, which does the same kind of job. Now, the other acronyms, I suppose, maybe not acronyms, but abbreviations. AMO, that's the Atlantic Multidecadal Oscillation, which is a very long-lasting pattern in the Atlantic of warm waters, basically averaged between about 20 north and 60, 70 north, a measure of the average sea surface temperature. And if that's above average, then you've got a positive phase of the AMO. The PDO is similar. It's in the North Atlantic, North Pacific. If you've got a strong area of anomalous warmth in the middle of the North Pacific, and oftentimes a cooler horseshoe of water near the coasts of Canada and the northern US. And that's a negative phase of the PDO. And both of these have an effect on global circulations, and they're very slow changing phenomena because sea surface temperatures do not change quickly. So they can be pretty useful for casting ahead into a seasonal forecast. If we have positive AMO and negative PDO right now, we're more than likely still going to have that in the summer. So they're our initial predictors when it comes to analogs.
Awesome. Thank you. I was starting to are these models, are these phenomena? What are these? I mean, I'm just basically a glorified roadie, so and I wear that as a badge of honor. But sometimes I just get
as you should.
What is this? So taking what you there, and obviously each region has its own impacts, but 2 words keep coming to mind over and over again, regardless: dry and above average hot. That seemed to be sort of what the big concern this year for the most part.
Yeah, I think so. Drought, dryness leading to wildfire risks, feeding back into high pressure patterns, which further exacerbate the drought and heat. So yeah, I think the main takeaway for Europe with provisos is a lot of dryness, above average temperatures, strong heat, possibly persistent heat waves, and at least strong heat spikes in places. The proviso being that risk of lower pressure becoming situated across parts of southern Europe. We saw how wet it possibly will be in Spain. So elevated risks of storms and flooding around Spain and potentially the Balkan Peninsula as well. Then as the summer proceeds, those threats increasing across more of southern Europe as low pressure takes more of a hold and the high pressure shifts a little further north. But yeah, the main bullet points should be dryness, heat waves.
Speaking as someone in the Northwest United States and how little snowpack we had, and I'm a bit fearful for our wildfire season out here. Both just in terms of destruction and how the smoke impacts are ultimately going to end up affecting our outdoor events. And the fact that there was the mention of the Northwest experiencing, I guess, above average temperatures earlier on in the summer. I'm curious how that's going to end up impacting some of these earlier outdoor events that we end up having. Obviously, Seattle and Vancouver both have World Cup coming here. Large mass gatherings, outdoor events, and we like our wildfires up here, unfortunately. So
yeah, that is certainly going to be a risk with that dryness and that heat. Dryness to start the summer, never mind going into summer. So wildfire risks and obviously the horror risk of smoke, which is something Brad will be touching on, I'm sure.
Right. Do you have a couple questions here in the chat? Serena would like to know is why do you use the models that you use, and what would you recommend for European weather, and why would you recommend that?
Well, the ECMWF and the CFS are the most tried and tested, and the ECMWF particularly outperforms other models. But we did look at the Canadian models, a Japanese model, or every global model, like perhaps remember seeing in the C3S model outlook, which blends 8 global models. So we try to look at as much information as possible. And if the models are trending in similar directions, it can lend more confidence to the forecast, and we can increase the probabilities of our outlooks. Sorry, lost my train of thought there. Yeah, but largely we base on the ECMWF and the CFS V2. If you're looking at it, that's right, from the outside, then usually you can't go wrong with looking at the ECMWF. But the important thing is to look at a range of different models and show where the consensus might be pointing rather than one model on its own. And that's actually quite important in short range forecasts up to 2 weeks ahead. There are apps and whatever that think they can deterministically tell you what where there's going to be in one spot 15 days time. But at that kind of range, you're looking at trends. So you want to see what the models are trending towards and how much agreement there is towards them, and look at the ensembles. That's to say, you take a starting point, adjust it very slightly, run the model. You run it about 50 times and see what the ensemble looks like.
Have another comment in here, kind of going to maybe slightly put you on the spot with this one, but we can sort of figure out how we want to deal with it. Sarah points out the North American forecast model kind of cuts off at the United States. It doesn't really scoop up a lot of Canada. Is there, obviously we can't produce the graphics for it at this point, but do you have a sort of a sense of what they might be looking at? And if not, do you think we might be able to kind of get a supplemental piece of information we could get out to attendees about Canada?
Sure, I can send that across. I'll look into it closer before opening my mouth too much. But as far as I recall it, we're looking at a warmer than average dry summer for much of Canada. But I could put more detail on that. That's my fault for just grabbing the graphics that only show the southern part of Canada, but our models certainly go up into Canada and around the globe.
Very cool. Well, yeah, we'll chat about that. We'll get hands on it. We'll
Mhm.
distribute to everyone because I think that that would be good. And thank you, Sarah, for putting that out. Yeah. Any other questions at this point? If not, we'll transition over to Brad. Brad's going to talk a bit, and then we'll come back and we'll answer some more questions. Now I have to just figure out how I get everyone off the screen other than Brad. So go for that. Let's see.
Good luck.
That and that. Wait, no, that's me in the screen. You don't want that. We are a professional operation around here, ladies and gentlemen.
Jake, while you're doing that, I just got a quick question for Stephen as it kind of occurs to me in terms of the years that you were looking at as comparatives. Was there anything particular in those years, or are we seeing, do they lead to global trends in terms of the years that you're particularly looking at when you're drawing with the analogs?
Yeah, you're trying to find the years that most closely match the oceanic and atmospheric patterns that you're
Right.
expecting in the summer. So, for example, I need to come back to the acronyms again, the positive AMO, negative PDO, and more than anything, the prospects of a strong El Nino. So those are the three main things. But also, you look at the recent past, mentioned in passing the disruptions to the polar vortex, which can have echoes even into the at least early summer.
Right. My geography A level somewhat helping me right now, but yeah, not anyway, we'll back off and let Brad carry on and come back with further questions. So,
well, we do have one more. We're going to go.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes,
it snuck in. Thank you, Ben, for pointing that out. I didn't see the dot down there. Have a question from Nicola down there. It says, you have spoken about heat and rain. Is there a way to understand the potential wind factors as well?
Yes, very briefly. Actually made a decision not to put the wind in, but where you have greater rainfall is generally where you can expect the stronger winds. You don't often expect stormy wind conditions in the summertime, but we are expecting some around the Med this summer. Not necessarily from large systems, although there could be one or two decent low pressure systems affecting the Med this summer, but strong winds that are hard to pinpoint at seasonal range because they're relatively small scale and short range features like strong severe storms, even tornadoes. So where you have unsettled conditions, there's certainly always going to be chances of sudden extreme winds, which of course are going to be an important factor for outdoor festivals.
Mm-hmm.
I was just also trying to pull up the AMO and PDO as I saw a quick question about those. But I think maybe I've explained it a second ago when you asked me that question.
Yeah, and I think one of the idea that jumped up in my head, and we'll work with DTN about doing this, but I think it might be kind of cool to, as a supplemental to the Be Weatherwise campaign, to kind of create sort of a cheat sheet on a lot of this that we can append to that package to be able to like understanding, the like weather terminology ultimately. So when you're hearing these things, be it when you're watching the news, when you're talking with your risk communicator, when you're, whoever you happen to be speaking with, you can sort of, have enough understanding of the terminology to be able to follow the conversation. I actually quite like putting something together, not to throw something on your lap, but I want to keep working with you all. So guess what? We have a project now.
I've just made a note to put together a glossary.
Yeah, word math around Be Weatherwise, it kind of links two of our projects, doesn't it, Jake? So, yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you very much. We can answer that. And Brad, I don't know if you want to get your slides up and we can hand off to you.
I am ready to go. I don't know if he has to unshare first for you to see my screen.
No, you're going out on the live feed, so you are good to go, friend.
Good to go here. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Great job there, Stephen. I'm going to give you a round of applause here. A nice clap on the screen there. Great job. Really valuable information. You wouldn't believe how much time and effort and expertise it takes to break down a global forecast, like Stephen just did, especially by region, by sector, and really dive in. So thank you for providing the valuable information as we dive headfirst into the busy live event season. Exciting time coming up here for all of us. So I'm Brad Nelson. I'm an on-site event meteorologist and senior solution engineer with DTN. I've been working with outdoor festivals and mass evacuations and emergency planning and response for large outdoor events for over 20 years now. I have some experience in the industry, been through a lot of hairy, crazy weather type situations as well, a lot of stressful times. So I kind of know some of the high pressure, high risk decisions y'all are trying to make in managing these events. I'm going to run through the impact and talk a little bit about, okay, we have Stephen's outlook. Where are the elevated risks? What are the impacts? What are the things that we should consider for safety managers and event organizers this live event season? And just talk a little bit too about just how weather impacts outdoor events. All right, so what we're seeing on the screen here is a clear reminder, weather isn't just a background factor at outdoor events. It's really like essentially one of the top driving forces that shapes our operational and safety decision we're always making. On the left is a real world example from an event I was at, the 2018 PGA Championship, where we had a weather evacuation due to a thunderstorm. You see the really dark clouds in the back. Yes. I don't think they're seeing the correct slides here. I think we need to go to my screen.
So are we, the slide that you have up is how weather impacts outdoor events?
Correct.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's what's going on the feed.
Okay, and I think in the chat, if you need to select my screen at the top of the toolbar.
Oh,
and maybe
that's wild.
Yeah,
Okay.
and maybe Stephen unshare if you can. That would probably take care of that. So there we go.
I'm showing as unshared, but
Okay.
that
Are we
confused me for
seeing
a
a slide,
second.
everybody, that says how weather impacts outdoor events? Yes. Okay.
Okay.
You know what? I have a nice, like, strongly worded letter going to Zoom webinars at this point that they keep changing things and not telling me about it. All right. Thank you.
All
Anyway,
the virtual
sorry, Brad,
platforms
continue.
are. All right. Thank you very much. Well, you can see the dark clouds in the back here. This was a thunderstorm bearing down on us that popped up only, about 5 to 10 miles north of the golf course when play was occurring in the middle of the day. So we had to quickly and safely evacuate over 50,000 people from the site. I wanted to show this example because it really shows how important it is to plan for efficient and timely egress routes, especially when you're evacuating tens of thousands of people. It was a really slow go here to get people to safe shelters and vehicles. And fortunately, many were caught up in the storm as it bore down on us, even though we had nearly an hour ahead of time to proceed with the evacuation. So lesson is here, you can have a great weather safety plan, think it's efficient enough, but it needs to coincide and gel properly with the limitations of the infrastructure, the timing, and the procedures in order to work overall. On the right, the graphic breaks down, I think, a small part of everything you got to consider when it comes to weather at outdoor events. Every part of our operation, from safety, comfort, logistics, staffing, your added costs for all this, concessions, public relations, and ultimately the continuity of the event itself, this year and years forward. So when conditions really shift from hazardous to really weather impactful, we're not just reacting to heavy rain, lightning, severe weather. We're managing all the ripple effects across the evac planning, your resource allocation, communication, and overall guest experience. So takeaway is effective weather planning isn't really a luxury. It's a core competency for all of us responsible for keeping large crowds safe in really complex outdoor environments. So when we talk about weather risks at live events, like this slide captures kind of the core hazards that we we talk about, turning for what can turn a normal, quiet show day into a high stakes safety operation where you got to make critical decisions, really, unfortunately, sometimes in the blink of an eye, right? Lightning remains our most critical threat. It's really the number one driver of immediate short fuse evacuations, but high winds are really right behind that. We've seen a number of stage collapses over the years. It can compromise these stages, tents, signage, and rigging as well. Heavy rain and flooding isn't just an inconvenience. It needs to be thought about because it affects drainage, your electrical systems, your access routes, your parking lots, and overall ground stability. And it can be a major safety hazard as well, especially if you're managing, a large outdoor festival with camping sites over multiple days. That needs to be accounted for. Extreme heat brings its own medical and operational challenges. It increased costs. It strains resources. Severe weather as a whole can escalate into structural damage, injuries, full-scale evacuations, and significant reputational damage, which is a major focus area for our industry. The wildfires and smoke, as Stephen touched upon, can introduce air quality concerns. It can affect both health and the continuity of the operations. It's interesting to note it's been a growing focus area in air quality and wildfire for weather risk management in recent years, I'd say. That's something that we consult with as risk communicator meteorologists quite a bit at DTN now. The fact is, every one of these hazards really demands proactive planning, mitigation, clear thresholds that are defined and well understood, and a unified response to keep our events safe and resilient. All right, let's go into what Stephen's outlook is and what we are expecting for things to consider. So we talked about both Europe and North America heading into the summer with persistent above normal heat. That has direct implications for how we plan and operate our events. The forecast highlights longer, hotter, and drier heat spells, especially across most of Europe, a large portion of the heart of Europe, Central and Northeast Europe, and Western and Southern US, with a little bit more normal activity in the central part of the US into Northeast Canada, the Northeast US, big ridge, potential heat. You can see the southern end of that here across Western Canada as well. So elevated fire risks in that region, certainly. Heat and humidity levels will be elevated as a result in these areas. That impacts comfort, but overall physiological stress on attendees and staff. It amplifies dehydration risks as well, and heat illness risk, and underlying drought conditions can worsen and be exacerbated as a result of these longer hot spells. Wildfire potential, the smoke and air quality disrupts operations. Even when fires are far away, the big takeaway is like the heat anomalies demand proactive planning around medical readiness, increased hydration, shade, air quality monitoring, and the need for flexible scheduling, I would say, to keep our events safe and resilient. All right, what it means. So what do we do? What does it mean for my event? The hotter summers directly translate into operational challenges for all of us. Every kind of disruption is a challenge, but knowing how to properly planning for these types of risks, that's why it's so extremely important. These hotter summers really lead to the elevated heat and humidity, elevated heat illness risk. So having that clear plan and practice plan is essential. Mitigation, multi-layer, kind of faceted type of planning. Got to have easy water access, misting, fans, cold towels, spacing, shifting show times to when conditions demand it, which this raises practical concerns like, do you allow attendees to bring water in? Do you provide free water in at concessions? How many free water refill stations do you need to allow everyone to one, easily access the water, and two, make it visible and clearly communicated. I've been at festivals, I've been at events, I have been subject to this. If there are long lines for water or the price is like astronomical, attendees will have a lower tendency to hydrate appropriately. They may resort to more alcoholic beverages. This only exacerbates the health and safety issues and heat risks. That's where communication too becomes critical, setting those expectations early, communicating ahead of time and during the event that hot weather is happening or in the forecast, and what are the risks as myself as an attendee to my event. Reinforce heat safety procedures, behaviors, and making sure shade and cooling options are visible and accessible. And then behind the scenes, we have to think about heat resistant staging, electrical protection to keep our infrastructure running and stable. So overall, heat's an issue, but it isn't just a comfort issue. It's like a full spectrum safety and operational risk, and requires intentional planning across every department at an event. I do want to touch specifically on wildfire and air quality. This slide really underscores that wildfire smoke and degraded air quality, they're now no longer edge case scenarios. It seems like they're happening more and more and more. They're mainstream operational risks now for live events, just like lightning, heavy rain, high winds. Smoke from hundreds of miles away can push AQI to unhealthy or hazardous ranges. It can be a big media story like it was with the governor's ball in 2023 in New York. It creates real public health challenges for attendees, staff, and performers as well. So to manage this, it's beyond simple planning and messaging, but thinking about layered protections. Do you provide respirator distribution or masks or medical readiness? Ramping that up. Hydration and rest areas again, clean air shelters with filtration, portable air cleaners, dust control measures when those conditions are warranted. So these elements kind of go into that fully integrated approach of an emergency operations plan, not treated as a surprise, as a last minute add-on. Should plan ahead for these types of situations. So just like severe weather, a lot of the decisions are driven by real-time data, observations, forecasts, and professional weather risk communication from meteorologists that are really digging in, know your event, know your concerns, and know your thresholds. Smoke and degraded air quality really is a crowd level hazard. So preparing for it with the same rigor, I think we apply for heat, lightning, as I mentioned, and wind. It's now essential for running a safe operation. All right, what about precipitation and storm impacts? Well, Stephen highlighted that both Europe and North America are heading into summer with some areas of elevated storm and precip risk. That has direct implications for outdoor events around the Mediterranean, in particular to the Iberian Peninsula and Spain. We're looking at increased storminess, heavier rains, with the potential for a couple intense med cyclones to develop as well. Heat and humidity building across the region as well will really kind of impact storm severity. So if you have a combination of the above normal precipitation with above normal heat and humidity, such as that area around the Mediterranean as we head into summer, that leads to stormier, more intense stormy conditions. In the US, we already have an active severe weather season. It's expected to continue through the rest of spring and summer with a heightened storm and flood risks in the central and the northeast US, and an active monsoon season eventually developing in the southwest with the added complication of dry thunderstorms in the west. And this can ignite fires without really delivering any meaningful rainfall. So the season for us demands kind of that tighter weather monitoring, stronger contingency planning and readiness that accounts for a potential rapid onset of storms, flooding, and other hazards. All right, just taking a look at the severe weather trend so far in the US, and it's off to a fast start. We got 369 tornadoes through April 19th. This is above the 75th percentile of the number of tornadoes through the year at this point. The image on the right is the total number of storm reports for tornadoes, damaging wind, and hail combined through April 19th, and there's been 3,000 reports so far, which is above the mean line in black. So Stephen's medium to long range forecast indicates we'll see this trend continue as the frequency of severe weather gradually shifts north into early summer then. So this slide is a reminder that real weather isn't just an operational inconvenience. It's kind of a core risk driver that demands professional support, discipline planning. So managing this, dedicated meteorologists, decision grade data and alerting, clear lightning and severe weather protocols and a safety plan, and building trigger charts for your staff is really important. One poorly managed event can really create significant litigation exposure and PR damage. So our infrastructure, parking lot areas, site integrity must be evaluated with weather impacts in mind. And then effective response also depends on robust communication systems and staff that are trained to manage large crowds calmly under pressure. Practice makes perfect. The more you practice, the better you're going to be at it. Evacuation and sheltering procedures got to be rehearsed so that when conditions do deteriorate, we can make a confident decision and the entire operation can move quickly and confidently, safely, and efficiently. All right, for the last impact, touching on the tropical, beyond heat and storms, we got to be thinking about the broader region of weather patterns. For Northern and Western Europe, including UK and Scandinavia, we're expecting systems that could bring some elevated wind and precip risks, along with a more variable pattern overall, swinging between these stormy periods and then quieter high pressure stretches. Stephen had mentioned that, some longer high pressure regimes setting up with some intermingled stormy periods. So as we move into later summer into the fall, with an enhanced risks of tropical systems over the Atlantic, the mid-Atlantic, we get these curving of tropical systems, which can send rain, extreme wind, and remnants to the UK and Northern Europe as named storms in that area of the world. The Atlantic basin, slightly above or near tropical overall, slightly above in the mid-Atlantic. And, just because we're relying on a quiet year, it only takes one storm. So got to be prepared for these type of tropical systems because they can cause massive downstream impacts overall. So with that, I believe that's all we have today. Thank you for attending. We have our emails on the screen for myself and Stephen. We are happy to answer any questions you have, provide any information you need after the call. If you're just curious about anything we talked about, need more clarification, feel free to reach out.
We actually have, if I could figure it out. Okay, good. We have a Q&A, and it's intrigued me because I'm going to reframe it a little bit.
Sure.
The question is, what would be an air quality threshold for a show stop? I'm going to expand on that a little bit and maybe not make it so much of an acute type of like a show stop, but when you're expecting poor air quality, making that decision, before, like the day before, or at least the morning of, as opposed to kind of getting the show going and the air quality is questionable and doing a show stop on it. In your professional estimation, in terms of air quality, how bad is too bad?
Yeah, it really depends. Are you able to see the chart that I have on the screen right now?
Yes, I do see the chart.
Okay, so there's various levels of AQI that has been studied for, sensitivity based on the level that you're looking for. This is a pretty standard chart where you get to, you start to get into this 100 plus range. 100 to 200 starts to get into that kind of annoying range, sensitive to some groups, I would say, but not really enough to stop a show or anything like that. And, but it might be considered ramping up your messaging, like we are expecting smoky conditions, you know, bring a mask, bring a respirator, whatever you need to, if you want to keep yourself, keep yourself from, you know, getting uncomfortable, getting a scratchy throat, right? Especially if you have asthma or any type of other respiratory concerns. And might, but especially as you get into this 200 plus range, that's where you really kind of need to consider about like, all right, what is this impact? What is the impact here on my event? And do I consider moving the show times, or especially when you get into 300 plus, like that is potential cancellation point. And that can be built into, your insurance plans as well. If you work with your insurer, they're starting to build these kind of like threats and risks for air quality and maybe event disruption into your parametric insurance as an example. So that needs to be kind of maybe discussed when you're, talking about, purchasing insurance or renewing for your live events. But that's kind of like the primary group, but it's like, there's different studies out there as well if we do a little research. But just to answer that question, yeah, 200 plus is kind of a really kind of impactful number for AQI.
Mhm.
When you approach 300 or more, that's a potential risk of cancellation.
Mhm. And I think a lot of what that would end up, there's sort of a demographic assessment that one needs to play with that a little bit too. I mean,
It is, yeah.
if you are dealing with an older audience, perhaps you can reasonably assume there might be more pre-existing conditions that will be more greatly affected by air quality, and that's going to factor into your decision making as well. So I'm intrigued by that. I remember there was a couple years ago, I think it was wildfires in Canada that were coming down, and there were a couple of, I believe, Great Lakes area shows that were canceled due to that. So the impacts are not even just localized. I mean, they're hundreds and hundreds of miles away. So, we got okay. So Mike has dropped in the chat. Says one element of weather evacs that I see different opinions on is the level of our duty of care, especially when it comes to ensuring every patron has the ability to evacuate to a properly grounded structure, a vehicle, outdoor permanent building. While it isn't feasible for a 50,000 person event that shuttles the majority or relies heavy on rideshare to also provide that much shelter. I also think just telling people to leave the grounds and then once they're off site, they're on their own isn't the most ideal solution either. Is there a standard you all follow when giving patrons options on how to safely shelter? That's a big question.
Yeah, it's one it is that's a serious question that we have to deal with when managing large events with tens of thousands of people, that you don't have a good option to bring them inside a safe sheltered area and you're just trying to push them to their vehicles or their parking lots or shuttles. Inevitably that you're going to have a risk of those being caught in a storm in an unsafe situation when you have that many people trying to get to a certain location. So it's one of those where if you have a facility or a place to shelter, that is your best possible, a permanent building or vehicles on site, where you're able to shelter people quickly. That is most ideal. But otherwise, you need to account for the time it takes for everyone to get to their vehicles or get inside a shuttle, when that is really the only option at that point. And that's a true thing. I mean, it's some of these events, I mean, they're out in the middle of nowhere and you might not have an actual structure that's going to house 50,000 people, right? So it's making sure the plan accounts for the time it takes to get everyone at least to the parking lot and into their vehicles, or at least give them the chance to do so, because at some point too, it is also under the individuals and the spectators that you're directing off site, that they have to take their own safety a little bit under their own accord at some point and make sure they're pushing to get to a safe place before a storm hits, for example. That's a real challenge. And I think it's around emergency planning for that, but also the communication, like providing a visual that there is a risk, there is a danger, like having screens with the radar on it, having lightning on there, or having potential forecast, have the forecast on the screen of what we might be dealing with, and then having clear messaging over a PA, over the loudspeakers, at the ingress egress routes of risks and concerns. It's all about communication and buttoning that up as well. It's not an easy thing to tackle, that's for sure. But that's where I think we start with that.
And it comes down to I think I saw Annie on mute, so I think Annie has thoughts. But I think to my and I know Mike understands this. I think this is where the tension comes in of how you're determining ultimately how many people you can safely accommodate when you're in the very early stages of planning for it. It's not just, can we fit 50,000 people into this space? Do we have the ability to shelter them, or at least get them to safe shelter within a reasonable amount of time? And that may be much less than your physical capacity. So that's not an answer. I know you know that, but that's really that's going to be the constant struggle that we have, is to push back against the forces telling us that, if there's enough room for them to wiggle by another person, sure, we can accommodate them, add them in, sell them a ticket, sell them some beer.
Yeah.
That's our job, to be the reasonable voice in the room. So, Annie, sorry, I saw you unbooted there.
No, I was actually going to say, because there's so much of this conversation to kind of carry on with, I wonder whether, Brad, you'd be interested in coming and sitting on one of our control rooms, which is our monthly member-to-member chat, and just get an opportunity to kind of, I think, like, it would be really good to dig into this, and not as a silo piece, but as something that works with crowd management in terms of, like, looking at audience profile, looking at parades and processions and other kinds of marathons and all sorts of weird and wonderful things. So, and the questions around staff welfare and things. So there feels to be so many angles that we could now take this information and go, okay, how does it work with our comm structures? And as you said, having stuff on screens and all of that. I know we're going to keep getting conversation in the chat, and we're very grateful for that. And I would kind of just wonder whether we put a pin in some of it and go, okay, there's so much to unpick here. So Brad and Stephen, I don't know if that might be of interest to you to come on and maybe kind of carry on that conversation a bit.
Yeah, I know. I'd be honored. We'd be glad to help. This is like, I'm passionate about this topic. I mean, so much so that not only do I have a meteorology degree, but I'm actually almost finished with my master's of emergency management, and really came from my experience in trying, helping organizations manage live events. So it's something we're passionate about and love to speak to, and we'd love to bounce ideas off of each other and be involved in future conversation.
I think we have next month's control room conversation locked in.
Yeah, all right. And I know Becca, who's our chair of that, is probably still in the room, but certainly has jumped on, given that the weather problems that they've had have been tremendous at Duke University and dealing with the athletics and stuff. So they've had a challenging time recently. So I know it will be top of her list as well. So yeah, and it's been really insightful today. So for both of you to be here is incredibly important for everyone to hear what's been said. But yeah, I'd love to move the conversation to that kind of plane of how how do we integrate that with the other crowd management stuff we do as well. I think that's it. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, we'll spin that up for next month and get all the details out to you. I mean, yeah, there seems to be in the chat here. Definitely, let's continue the discussion. Yeah. Gary Brooks says, I'd like to join in the control room session too, to plug in on the event cancellation insurance side. Fantastic.
Yeah, I was thinking of Gary when you mentioned insurance. I knew he was in the room. So
I'll tell you what, since I know we have folks that are on here that aren't necessarily GCMA members, the control rooms are their GCMA member kind of meetups will open up next month as well. I'll send the invite out to everyone that is registered for this, so you can go and register for that one as well. And then let's plan on for the May control room to carry on this conversation, talk a bit about the operational side, and carry on.
I love it when you get excited, Jake, and give stuff away. It's great. I wish
I
you'd do this more
mean,
often.
I'm about the worst business person ever. I'm like, yes, I love it. Let's just give it away. But honestly, that's why to bring it back around. I mean, that's why I am committed to GCMA and this project and having you all here and sharing this knowledge, and why we are incredibly grateful for the support of DTN as well. They believe in the mission of what we're trying to do here, and we couldn't ask for better partners. So thank you for everything that you all do. And yeah, as always, just drop us a line if you have any questions. We'll get the invite out for the control room next month. And thank you all for staying after class with us.
Yeah.
Gotta love it. So
Steve and Brad, it's been amazing. Thank you guys so much. And yeah, really high level stuff. So incredibly supportive of the industry. So thank you.
Very cool.
Absolute pleasure.
Well, go enjoy the sunshine, rain, or whatever happens to be happening in your part of the world. So chat soon, y'all.
Right. See you all soon. See you all at control room next month.
Yeah.
Brilliant stuff.
Thank you all. This was fun.
Excellent. Thanks so much, guys.